What if the abandoned mansion everyone feared was hiding a heartbreaking secret that could change one family's destiny forever? When a pregnant woman named Emily Parker loses everything after her husband walks away. She buys the forgotten Ashcroft Manor, never imagining it holds a century-old mystery, hidden letters, and a truth that no one was meant to uncover. Stay until the end, because the final revelation doesn't just rewrite the manor's history, it will completely change the way you think about love, loss, and second chances forever. The old Victorian mansion stood like a forgotten guardian at the end of Maple Hollow Road, its weathered brick walls and towering windows silently watching the world pass by. Time had stolen its beauty, but not its secrets. Standing at the front door, Emily Parker instinctively rested one hand on her growing belly. 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a heart shattered beyond repair. She wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Only 3 months earlier, her husband, Benjamin Carter, had walked away without a second thought. The moment Emily told him she was expecting their first child, everything they had built together collapsed. Instead of celebrating, he handed her divorce papers and disappeared, leaving her alone to face an uncertain future. The small inheritance left by her grandmother wasn't enough to rebuild the life she'd lost. Everyone expected her to buy a modest apartment somewhere safe. Instead, she spent every dollar on this abandoned mansion nearly 40 miles from the nearest city. Her parents called it reckless. Her friends thought grief had clouded her judgment. Even Emily couldn't fully explain why she'd chosen this forgotten place. Yet the instant she crossed the threshold, something inside her whispered that she belonged here. The grand foyer echoed beneath her footsteps. Dust floated through beams of afternoon sunlight, while the mahogany staircase groaned softly, as though the house were awakening after decades of silence. Her phone buzzed. Another message from her mother. "Please come home. That house will ruin you. Think about the baby." Emily quietly silenced the screen. Her parents had always believed success meant promotions, investments, and carefully planned lives. Growing up, she'd been raised more by babysitters than by family dinners or bedtime stories. That wouldn't be her child's future. No matter how difficult life became, this house would become a real home. Moving slowly upstairs, she opened each forgotten room one by one. A master bedroom scarred by time. 2 empty bedrooms covered in faded wallpaper. An old bathroom where rust clung to every fixture. Each room felt strangely alive, as though it still remembered the family that had once filled it with laughter. Then she reached the final room at the end of the hallway. Sunlight spilled through dusty windows onto walls painted with faded circus animals. It had once been a nursery. Emily smiled through tears, gently rubbing her belly. Someone dreamed about a baby in this room once, just like I'm dreaming about you. She owned almost nothing now. A mattress would arrive tomorrow. A small table, 2 chairs. She would have to build her entire life again, one piece at a time. That night, she spread an old sleeping bag across the living room floor. The house settled around her with strange sounds, creaking floorboards, groaning pipes, and the occasional scratching somewhere inside the walls. "Just mice," she whispered, forcing herself to smile. Every old house has mice, but sleep refused to come. Lying beneath the moonlight, filtering through ancient oak branches, Emily finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her reality. Alone. Pregnant. Without a job. Owning a crumbling mansion she could barely afford to repair. Everyone believed she was destroying what remained of her life. Maybe they were right. Then, a loud creak echoed from somewhere upstairs. Emily slowly opened her eyes. For reasons she couldn't explain, the fear faded almost as quickly as it appeared. Instead, An overwhelming sense of peace settled over her. It felt as if the old mansion had been waiting for her, as though two broken souls had finally found each other. She gently placed both hands over her baby and whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow, we'll start bringing this house back to life." What Emily didn't know was that the house had been waiting nearly 100 years for a woman exactly like her. And behind one ordinary-looking wall, a secret was waiting that would change both her life, Ambun's, and her unborn child's destiny forever. The next morning, Emily woke before sunrise to the sound of rain tapping softly against the stained glass windows. For the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar. Purpose. There was no one coming to rescue her. No husband, no parents, no miracle waiting outside the front door. If this house was ever going to become a home for her baby, she would have to save it herself. She tied her hair back, rolled up the sleeves of her old flannel shirt, and spent the morning clearing decades of overgrown weeds from what had once been a beautiful garden. Thick vines had swallowed broken stone paths, while thorn bushes reached almost as high as her shoulders. "This place deserves another chance," she whispered, smiling down at her unborn daughter. "So do we." Her shovel struck something hard beneath the soil. Clang! Emily frowned, carefully brushing away the dirt. She uncovered a tarnished silver locket wrapped in tangled tree roots. Its hinge resisted at first before finally snapping open with a faint click. Inside was a faded sepia photograph of a young woman dressed in clothing from another era. The woman wore a gentle smile, but sadness lingered in her eyes. Emily stared at the tiny portrait longer than she intended. Something about the woman's face felt strangely familiar. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her cheekbones. Even the soft smile looked uncannily like her own reflection. A chill crept down her spine. "That's impossible!" She slipped the locket into her pocket, telling herself coincidence was the only explanation. Yet the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. That afternoon, Emily drove into the small mountain town and visited the local library. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Harper, looked pleasantly surprised when Emily mentioned the address of her new home. "You bought Ashcroft Manor?" Emily nodded. "I'm trying to learn a little about its history." The librarian hesitated before leading her toward a dusty archive room tucked behind rows of forgotten books. "There isn't much," she admitted. "But the Ashcroft family was once the wealthiest family in the county." Hours passed as Emily sorted through faded newspaper clippings, property records, and yellowed photographs. She learned that Charles Ashcroft had built the mansion in the early 1920s after becoming rich from the timber industry. His wife, Eleanor Ashcroft, appeared in nearly every photograph beside him. Beautiful, elegant, always smiling, yet somehow always lonely. They never had children. Mrs. Harper quietly explained while organizing books nearby. People talked about it for years. Emily looked up. "Did anyone know why?" The old woman lowered her voice. "There were rumors. Some believed Mrs. Ashcroft couldn't have children. In those days, people judged women very harshly for that." Emily instinctively rested a hand over her belly. The words struck deeper than she expected. She couldn't imagine longing for a child and never being given the chance to become a mother. Over the next several days, life settled into a routine. Each morning, Emily cleaned another room. Every afternoon, Jack Sullivan, a quiet handyman who owned a nearby farm, arrived to repair the house's electrical system and reinforce its aging foundation. Unlike everyone else in town, Jack never questioned why she'd bought the mansion. He simply worked. One afternoon, while replacing damaged floorboards upstairs, Emily unfolded the original blueprints she had discovered in the attic. She compared them to the hallway outside. Again, the measurements didn't make sense. According to the plans, there should have been nearly 4 extra feet between the hallway wall and the outside of the house. She measured twice. Then a third time. The numbers never changed. There has to be another room, she murmured. When Jack arrived later that afternoon, she handed him the blueprint. I think something's hidden behind this wall. Jack studied the drawing carefully before running his rough hands along an enormous oak bookcase built into the hallway. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then he frowned. This isn't part of the original wall. Emily's heartbeat quickened. What do you mean? He crouched lower, brushing away years of dust near the base. Hidden beneath decorative molding were heavy iron screws. Deliberately concealed. Jack slowly looked back at her. Someone didn't want this bookcase moved. Silence filled the hallway. Together they removed every dusty book and antique ornament from the shelves. Even empty, the bookcase barely shifted. With one final push, it suddenly swung outward. Not like furniture, like a door. Behind it appeared the unmistakable outline of another entrance, painted over so perfectly that no one would have noticed it for decades. Emily's breath caught. Oh my God. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. There really is a hidden room. Jack reached toward the ancient doorknob, then stopped. A cold draft slipped through the narrow crack around the sealed door. Neither of them had opened it. Neither of them had spoken. Yet both felt exactly the same thing. Someone, or something, had been waiting on the other side, and after nearly 100 years, the door was finally about to open. Neither Emily nor Jack spoke. For several long seconds, they simply stared at the narrow opening hidden behind the massive bookcase. Dust drifted lazily through the beam of afternoon sunlight, while an icy draft escaped from the darkness beyond. It wasn't just cold. It felt untouched, as though the air inside had remained sealed for generations. Jack reached for a flashlight resting in his toolbox. You don't have to go in today, he said quietly. Emily looked down at the tiny curve of her stomach before meeting his eyes again. If someone went through this much trouble to hide a room, she replied. There has to be a reason. Jack nodded. Together, they pushed the hidden door open. Its rusty hinges screamed into the silence. The sound echoed through the mansion like a voice awakening after decades of sleep. The room beyond was surprisingly small. No windows. No fireplace. Only shelves lining every wall, each buried beneath thick blankets of dust. A faded rocking chair sat in one corner, gently tilted toward the center of the room. For a strange moment, Emily could almost imagine someone sitting there, waiting. The flashlight swept across the floor. Boxes, suitcases, a child's wooden horse with one missing wheel, a porcelain doll lying on its side, its painted blue eyes staring blankly toward the ceiling. Emily shivered. It feels like time stopped in here. Jack knelt beside an old cedar trunk. The brass lock had rusted away long ago. He lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of carefully folded baby blankets. Tiny knitted sweaters, infant shoes no larger than the palm of Emily's hand. Everything had been preserved with astonishing care. Emily gently picked up one of the blankets. Despite the years, it remained impossibly soft. Someone had loved these things. Someone had expected a child to wear them. But they said the Ashcrofts never had children. Emily whispered. Jack didn't answer. Instead, his flashlight landed on another object resting beneath the blankets. A leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked with age, but elegant gold letters were still visible. Emily carefully opened the first page. The handwriting flowed across the paper with graceful precision. If anyone ever finds these pages, then the truth has finally escaped the walls that imprisoned it. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She turned another page. Everyone believes I am barren. They whisper behind closed doors. They pity my husband. They call our home cursed. Her breathing slowed. Every word seemed painfully alive, despite being written nearly a century earlier. Another page. But they are wrong. I carried a child. Emily froze. She looked at Jack. He said they never had children. Jack swallowed hard. Keep reading. Her fingers trembled as she turned the next page. Charles ordered every room prepared for our baby's arrival. He laughed as he painted circus animals on the nursery walls himself. Emily's mind raced. The nursery? The faded circus animals upstairs? The room she had stood in only days before. It had belonged to them. She continued. Then our son disappeared. Emily stopped breathing. What? She read the sentence again. Not died. Disappeared. The journal slipped slightly in her hands. Jack stared at her. What does it say? Emily looked up, her voice barely audible. She says the baby vanished. Silence filled the room. Only the sound of rain striking the windows somewhere beyond the hidden walls broke the stillness. Emily forced herself to continue. Everyone believed I had lost my mind. Even Charles refused to believe what I saw. But every night I heard crying behind these walls. Jack slowly turned his flashlight toward the surrounding shelves. Neither of them spoke. Both were suddenly aware of how many walls surrounded them. How many hidden spaces this enormous mansion might still conceal. Emily closed the journal for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. This doesn't make sense. Jack nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. As he spoke, something caught the edge of the flashlight's beam. Scratched into the wooden floor beneath the rocking chair were dozens of tiny marks. Not random scratches. Dates. One beneath another. Year after year. As though someone had been counting time. Emily knelt beside them. The final date had been carved exactly 98 years earlier. Below it, one final sentence. So faint she almost missed it. He's still here. Before either of them could react, the rocking chair moved. Just once. A slow, gentle creak. Neither Emily nor Jack had touched it. The room was completely still. No wind. No movement. Yet the chair continued to sway ever so slightly. Emily instinctively stepped backward, one hand protecting her unborn child. Jack raised the flashlight towards the empty corner. There was no one there, but both of them felt it. The unmistakable sensation that they were no longer alone. And somewhere deep inside the mansion, a child's faint laugh echoed through the walls. The child's laughter vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Silence settled over the hidden room once again. Emily and Jack remained frozen where they stood, listening for another sound. Nothing came. Only the distant rhythm of rain against the mansion's roof reminded them that the world outside still existed. Finally, Jack spoke. We should leave. Emily nodded, but her eyes never left the journal resting in her hands. She had entered the hidden room believing she was uncovering the history of an old house. Now she wasn't so sure. As they stepped back into the hallway, Jack carefully closed the concealed door behind them. The heavy bookcase slid back into place, hiding every trace of the secret room as if it had never existed. Neither of them mentioned the rocking chair. Neither of them tried to explain the laughter. Some experiences refused to fit inside logic. Uarha. That evening, Emily sat alone in the old nursery. The faded circus animals on the wallpaper no longer looked cheerful. Now they felt like silent witnesses. She gently opened Eleanor Ashcroft's journal again, reading page after page beneath the warm glow of a table lamp. Each entry revealed another piece of a woman she had never met, yet somehow understood. The loneliness, the fear, the desperate hope that her child would survive. Emily found herself wiping away tears more than once. She wasn't reading the diary of a ghost. She was reading the heart of a mother. For months, Emily had believed she was the unluckiest woman alive. Her husband had abandoned her. Her career had collapsed. She was preparing to raise a baby completely alone. But Eleanor's words forced her to see something different. Pain wasn't unique to her generation. Nearly a century earlier, another woman had stood inside these same walls carrying the same fears, praying for the same miracle. Time had changed almost everything. Except a mother's love? Emily slowly rested both hands across her stomach. "I understand you," she whispered into the empty room. "And I won't let your story disappear." For the first time since arriving at Ashcroft Manor, she no longer felt like an outsider. She felt connected. The following morning, Emily drove to visit the town's oldest resident, 86-year-old Margaret Collins, a woman many locals described as the unofficial historian of the valley. Margaret welcomed her warmly but grew noticeably quiet the moment Emily mentioned Ashcroft Manor. "I've spent my whole life hearing stories about that place," the elderly woman admitted. "My grandmother worked there as a kitchen maid when she was a little girl." Emily leaned forward. "Did she ever mention the Ashcroft family?" Margaret nodded slowly. "She always said Mrs. Eleanor wasn't frightening. She was grieving." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "Everyone remembers the rumors," Margaret continued. "They talked about curses and ghosts because those stories were easier to believe than the truth." "What truth?" The old woman stared thoughtfully through the window before answering. "My grandmother believed something terrible happened to Eleanor's child." Emily's breath caught. "So, there really was a baby?" Margaret hesitated. "No birth certificate was ever found?" "No grave either. But my grandmother swore she heard a baby crying inside that house long after everyone claimed the nursery had been emptied." The room fell silent. Margaret reached across the table and gently squeezed Emily's hand. "People fear what they don't understand. Sometimes that fear creates legends. And sometimes—" She paused. "The legends exist because someone wanted the truth buried." Driving home. Emily couldn't stop thinking about those words. For days she had allowed herself to believe the mansion was haunted by something evil. Now she wondered if she had misunderstood everything. What if the strange presence inside Ashcroft Manor wasn't trying to frighten her? What if it had been trying to lead her? The hidden room? The journal? The nursery? None of those discoveries had happened by accident. It felt as though someone had carefully guided her from one clue to the next. As she pulled into the driveway, sunlight broke through the storm clouds, bathing the old mansion in a warm, golden glow. For the first time, it no longer looked abandoned. It looked patient. Waiting. Emily smiled softly. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she whispered towards the house. "If you have a story to tell, I'm ready to listen." High above her, behind the dusty window of the hidden room, a curtain shifted ever so slightly. No wind stirred the trees. No breeze crossed the hill. Yet someone or something had heard her promise. And from that moment forward, the mystery of Ashcroft Manor was no longer just a puzzle Emily wanted to solve. It had become a promise she was determined to keep. The promise Emily made that evening changed more than her state of mind. It changed the way she approached every new day. Instead of seeing Ashcroft Manor as a burden she had to repair, she began treating it as a story waiting to be finished. Every room, every loose floorboard, every faded photograph became another piece of a puzzle that someone had desperately tried to hide. One crisp morning, Jack arrived with a small pickup truck filled with reclaimed lumber. "I found these at an old farmhouse that was being torn down," he said with a grin. "Thought they might fit the manor better than brand new wood." Emily smiled. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Jack shrugged. "But this place deserves someone who believes in it." His words lingered in Emily's mind long after they began working. For the first time since Benjamin had abandoned her, she realized not everyone walked away when life became difficult. Some people quietly stayed. As they replaced damaged floorboards inside the nursery, Jack's hammer struck something hollow beneath the old pine planks. Both of them stopped. "You hear that?" Emily nodded. "It sounds empty." Carefully, they removed several boards until a narrow wooden compartment appeared beneath the floor. Unlike the hidden room behind the bookcase, this space had been intentionally built into the foundation. Inside rested a small iron box. Its surface was coated with rust, but the lock had already broken from age. Emily slowly lifted the lid. Instead of jewelry or money, the box contained neatly tied bundles of letters. Dozens of them. Every envelope carried the same elegant handwriting. To my child. Emily felt her heart skip. They're all addressed to the baby. Jack looked over her shoulder. But if the child disappeared? Then Eleanor never stopped writing. Emily untied the first bundle. The paper had yellowed with time, yet the ink remained surprisingly clear. My precious little one. The first letter began, If these words ever reach you, I hope you know that not a single day has passed without your mother searching for you. Emily swallowed hard. She turned to another letter. Everyone tells me to accept that you're gone. They ask me to move on. But a mother's heart does not surrender simply because the world has abandoned hope. Emily couldn't continue for several seconds. She pressed one hand against her own stomach. Without realizing it, tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Over the following week, Emily devoted herself to reading every letter. Some were filled with hope, others with unbearable grief. But together they painted a completely different picture of Eleanor Ashcroft than the town's old rumors ever had. She wasn't a woman driven mad by loss. She was a mother who had refused to let her child be forgotten. The discovery changed everything. Emily began organizing the journals, letters, photographs, and family documents into careful folders across the dining room table. What had started as curiosity slowly became a mission. If the truth has been buried for nearly a century, she told Jack one afternoon, someone has to uncover it. Jack nodded. And I think that someone is you. Word spread quickly through the small town that someone was finally restoring Ashcroft Manor. Neighbors who had avoided the property for decades began stopping by. Some offered old photographs. Others shared family stories passed down through generations. An elderly woman arrived carrying a faded newspaper clipping her father had saved nearly 80 years earlier. A retired carpenter remembered repairing part of the roof as a teenager. Each visitor brought another small piece of history. For the first time in decades, the mansion was no longer a place people feared. It became a place people remembered. Emily realized something remarkable. She had arrived believing she was completely alone. Now, complete strangers were helping her rebuild both the house and the forgotten legacy of the family who had lived there. Perhaps this was the real reason she had been led to Ashcroft Manor. Not simply to uncover a mystery, but to give an entire community permission to remember. Late one evening, after everyone had gone home, Emily carried Eleanor's letters back into the nursery. She carefully placed them inside the old cedar trunk, where they had rested for generations. I promise, she whispered softly. Your voice won't disappear again. At that exact moment, the baby kicked gently beneath her hands. Emily smiled. For the first time in months, the movement didn't remind her of fear or uncertainty. It reminded her of hope. Outside, the wind rustled through the ancient oak trees surrounding the manor. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echoed across the valley. The house felt different now. Brighter, warmer, almost alive. Emily had come searching for a place to rebuild her own future. Instead, she had been entrusted with restoring someone else's past. She didn't realize it yet. But among Eleanor's final bundle of letters lay a single document that would expose the darkest secret the Ashcroft family had ever hidden. A secret powerful enough to explain why an entire century of lies had been built around one missing child. Winter arrived quietly in Maple Hollow, covering the mountains with a soft layer of frost that sparkled beneath the morning sun. Ashcroft Manor looked different now. The once forgotten estate no longer resembled a haunted relic hidden from the world. Fresh paint gleamed across the wooden siding. Flower beds had been restored, and warm light poured from every window each evening, replacing decades of darkness with unmistakable signs of life. Emily often stood on the front porch before sunrise, wrapping both hands around a steaming mug of tea while listening to the peaceful silence surrounding the property. Months earlier, silence had terrified her. Now it comforted her. It reminded her how far she had come. When she had first crossed the front gate, she carried nothing but heartbreak, fear, and uncertainty. Every step had been heavy with disappointment. Benjamin's betrayal had convinced her she wasn't enough as a wife, as a woman, and certainly not as a future mother. But somewhere between restoring broken walls and uncovering Eleanor's hidden letters, something extraordinary had happened. She had stopped defining herself by the people who abandoned her. Instead, she began defining herself by the life she was creating. One Saturday morning, volunteers from across town gathered once again to help finish restoring the estate. Teenagers painted fences while retired carpenters repaired antique stair railings. Families planted rose bushes along the front garden, and children laughed as they chased one another beneath the towering oak trees. Emily watched them from the porch with tears quietly forming in her eyes. Only a few months earlier, everyone had crossed the street to avoid this property. Now it had become the heart of the community. Jack walked over carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. "I thought you might need this." Emily smiled. "I was just thinking." "Dangerous habit," Jack teased. She laughed. "You know what amazes me? What? I came here believing I had lost everything." She looked toward the families working together. "But somehow, losing everything made room for something better." Jack followed her gaze. "Sometimes life tears down the walls we built, so it can build the ones we actually need?" Emily nodded thoughtfully. For the first time in years, she believed that was true. Later that afternoon, Emily organized a small gathering inside the mansion to thank everyone who had helped with the restoration. The grand dining room, once covered in dust and cobwebs, echoed with conversation and laughter. Children ran through the hallway without fear. Neighbors shared homemade meals around the enormous oak table. Music drifted softly from an old record player Jack had repaired. Emily stood quietly in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. The mansion had finally become what it was always meant to be. A home? Not only for her, but for everyone willing to walk through its doors. As the evening drew to a close, Mrs. Harper, the elderly librarian who had first told Emily about the Ashcroft family, approached her with a small wrapped package. "I found this while cleaning our archives," she explained. "I think it belongs here." Emily carefully unwrapped the parcel. Inside was a faded black and white photograph. It showed Eleanor Ashcroft standing on the very front porch where Emily now lived. Eleanor rested one hand gently across her pregnant stomach. On the back of the photograph were a few handwritten words. "Hope always outlives fear." Emily stared at the message in silence. It felt less like an old photograph, and more like a blessing sent across generations. That night, after everyone had left, Emily placed the photograph beside Eleanor's journal in the restored nursery. She looked around the room. Fresh white curtains moved gently in the breeze. The antique cradle Jack had handcrafted stood beside the window. Tiny blankets rested neatly inside. The room no longer carried the weight of sorrow. It carried expectation. Emily slowly lowered herself into the old rocking chair, the very chair that had mysteriously moved on its own the night she first discovered the hidden room. She hesitated, then smiled. "I'm not afraid anymore." The chair rocked gently beneath her, not because of unseen forces, but because she had finally chosen peace over fear. She closed her eyes. "I think I understand now. This house never wanted to trap anyone. It wanted someone to finish its story." As Emily prepared to stand, a sudden pain tightened across her abdomen. She froze. Another contraction followed only minutes later. She glanced at the clock. The contractions weren't close together yet. Still, something felt different. Her daughter was coming. Emily took several slow breaths before reaching for her phone. Jack answered on the second ring. "Emily, I think," she said, smiling despite the discomfort. "I think it's time. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Outside, the wind began rising with surprising force. Dark clouds rolled over the mountains much faster than weather forecasts had predicted. By the time Jack's truck reached the front gate, snow mixed with freezing rain hammered against the windshield. Power lines swayed violently. Tree branches bent beneath the growing storm. Jack hurried inside. Emily was already waiting near the front door with a small hospital bag in one hand. "You ready?" he asked. Emily looked around the grand entrance one last time. The restored staircase, the glowing fireplace, the photographs lining the walls, the home that had rebuilt her life. She smiled through another contraction. "I am now." As they stepped outside, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated Ashcroft Manor from roof to foundation. For just a single heartbeat, Emily thought she saw a familiar figure standing in the upstairs nursery window. A woman dressed in white, one hand resting gently over her heart, the other raised in a quiet farewell. Emily blinked. The figure was gone. Only the softly glowing nursery remained. She smiled instead of questioning what she had seen. Some mysteries no longer needed explanations. Some were simply gifts. Holding her unborn daughter close, Emily climbed into Jack's truck as the storm raged around them. Neither of them realized that before dawn broke over Maple Hollow, one remarkable life would begin. And another remarkable story hidden for nearly a century would finally come to its beautiful, long-awaited end. The road to the hospital disappeared beneath sheets of freezing rain. Jack gripped the steering wheel with both hands as the truck struggled through the storm. Wind slammed against the doors. Branches whipped across the highway, and every flash of lightning turned the mountains into sharp, black silhouettes. Beside him, Emily breathed through another contraction. "Stay with me," Jack said, glancing toward her. "We're almost there." Emily tried to answer, but pain stole her breath. Then the truck suddenly jerked. A massive tree had fallen across the road. Jack slammed on the brakes. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The hospital was less than 10 miles away, but there was no path forward. Behind them, the road was quickly flooding. Jack looked at Emily. Her face had gone pale. "The baby isn't waiting," she whispered. He turned the truck around immediately. They had only one place to go: Ashcroft Manor. No. By the time they reached the estate, the power had failed. The mansion stood dark against the storm, except for one strange golden light glowing from the upstairs nursery. Jack stared at it. "Did you leave a lamp on?" Emily shook her head. They hurried inside. The front hall was cold, but the fireplace ignited almost instantly when Jack struck a match. He gathered blankets, boiled water on the old gas stove, and called emergency services. The dispatcher told them roads were blocked in every direction. Help would come when conditions allowed. But not soon enough. Emily leaned against the staircase as another contraction tore through her. Jack caught her before she fell. "I can't do this," she cried. "Yes, you can." "No, Jack, I can't." He held her shoulders and looked directly into her eyes. "You rebuilt this entire house while carrying a child and a broken heart. You uncovered a truth everyone else was too afraid to face. You brought a community back together." His voice softened. "You are stronger than you know." Emily stared at him, trembling. Then she nodded. "Take me to the nursery." "Ah." The room was warm when they entered. Far warmer than the rest of the house. The golden light Emily had seen from outside came from the small table beside the rocking chair, though no electricity reached the mansion. Neither of them questioned it. There was no time. Jack arranged blankets near the fireplace, while Emily lowered herself onto the bed. He remained on the phone with the emergency dispatcher, following every instruction carefully. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, Emily fought with every ounce of strength she possessed. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. At one point, exhausted and terrified, she turned her head toward Eleanor's photograph on the dresser. "Please," Emily whispered, "help me." The curtains lifted gently, though the windows were closed. The rocking chair began to move, back and forth, slowly, calmly. Then Emily heard a voice, not through the room, inside her heart. "You are not alone." She closed her eyes and pushed. A moment later, a newborn's cry filled the nursery. The sound rose above the thunder, clear and powerful. Jack laughed through tears. "She's here." He carefully placed the baby into Emily's arms. Emily looked down at her daughter's tiny face, and every fear she had carried for months suddenly disappeared. Her baby was alive! Warm. Perfect. "Hello, my beautiful girl," she whispered. The infant opened her eyes. At that exact moment, every light inside Ashcroft Manor flickered to life. "Iyasam." The storm weakened just before sunrise. Emergency crews finally reached the estate and confirmed that both mother and child were healthy. As paramedics prepared to transport them to the hospital for observation, one of the men paused near the nursery wall. Was this always here? Emily looked toward him. A section of faded wallpaper had peeled away during the storm, revealing a narrow panel in the wood. Jack opened it carefully. Inside was a final hidden compartment. It contained a small silver bracelet, a birth record, and one sealed letter. Emily recognized Eleanor's handwriting immediately. The birth record belonged to a baby boy named Thomas Ashcroft, born inside the manor nearly 90 years earlier. The letter explained everything. Eleanor's sister had secretly taken the child after Charles Ashcroft died, believing the family fortune would be seized if the baby's existence became known. She had promised to return him when the danger passed. But she never did. Thomas had been raised under another name in a neighboring state. Eleanor spent the rest of her life searching for him, never knowing he had survived. Emily stared at the document in disbelief. The child had not died. He had lived. The story everyone believed was a tragedy had contained hope all along. Weeks later, Mrs. Harper helped Emily trace Thomas Ashcroft's descendants. His son, now an elderly man named Robert Hale, traveled to Maple Hollow with his family. When Robert entered the nursery, he carried an old photograph of his father. The resemblance to Eleanor was unmistakable. Robert stood silently beside her journal, tears filling his eyes. "My father always said he felt as though part of his life was missing," he whispered. Emily handed him the silver bracelet. "Your grandmother never stopped loving him." Robert pressed the bracelet to his chest. For nearly a century, the Ashcroft family had lived beneath the weight of a lie. Now, at last, the truth had returned home. That spring, Emily opened Ashcroft Manor to the community. Part of the estate became a small historical center dedicated to forgotten family stories. The restored nursery became a peaceful room where mothers facing hardship could receive support, clothing, and guidance. Emily named the project the Eleanor House Foundation. Its purpose was simple. No mother should feel abandoned. No child should feel forgotten. And no painful story should be denied the chance to become something meaningful. Jack remained beside her through every step. He never tried to replace what she had lost. He simply helped her believe in what she could still build. One warm afternoon, Emily stood on the front porch holding her daughter, whom she had named Hope Eleanor Parker. Neighbors filled the lawn. Children played beneath the oak trees. Music drifted through open windows. Ashcroft Manor was no longer known as the house where a child disappeared. It was known as the house where lost stories came home. Emily looked toward the nursery window. For one brief moment, She saw Eleanor standing behind the glass. She was smiling. Then sunlight filled the room, and the figure faded away. Emily kissed her daughter's forehead. "Sometimes," she whispered, "life doesn't return what it takes from us." She looked around at the home, the community, and the people who had become her family. "But if we remain brave enough to keep going, it may give us something we never knew we were searching for." She had arrived at Ashcroft Manor believing her life was over. Instead, it became the place where her real life began. And within those restored walls, Emily finally understood the truth Eleanor had tried to preserve for generations. Grief may close one chapter. Fear may darken the road ahead. But love, when given the courage to endure, can turn even the most painful ending into a beautiful beginning. Some stories stay with us because of the twists. Others stay because they quietly remind us of something we've forgotten about ourselves. Emily's story was never really about an old stone house hidden in the woods. It was about a truth that many people spend their entire lives searching for. No one is beyond hope. No one is too broken to begin again. And sometimes, the people who believe they have the least to offer become the ones who change the most lives. For years, Emily believed her greatest weakness was that she had been abandoned. She thought her painful past made her unworthy of love. But in the end, that very pain became the reason she could recognize loneliness in someone else's eyes before they ever spoke a word. Her scars did not disqualify her. They prepared her. Margaret understood something the world often forgets. People don't always need someone to solve their problems. They need someone willing to sit beside them while they gather the strength to solve them themselves. A warm meal may quiet an empty stomach. A safe bed may ease a difficult night. But being seen, being welcomed, being reminded that your life still matters, those gifts can change the direction of an entire future. Perhaps that is why kindness is never as small as it seems. We rarely witness the full journey of the people we help. A single conversation may prevent someone from giving up. One act of compassion may inspire another. A door held open today may become a shelter for countless others tomorrow. Emily never became famous. She never sought recognition. She simply chose, day after day, to leave the light on. And because of that simple decision, generations of strangers discovered that even after the darkest winters, warmth still existed somewhere in the world. Perhaps there is someone in your own life who feels invisible. A neighbor living alone? A coworker who smiles but never talks about what they're carrying. A family member who quietly stopped asking for help because they no longer believe anyone will come. You may not be able to erase their pain. Very few of us can, but you can remind them that they do not have to face it alone. Sometimes that begins with a phone call, a visit, a shared meal, a listening ear, or simply saying, "I'm here." Those two words have rescued more hearts than we will ever know. As Margaret discovered, as Thomas believed, and as Emily eventually became, the brightest light in this world is rarely the one that shines for itself. It is the one that stays lit, so someone lost in the darkness can find their way home. If Emily's journey touched your heart, take a moment today to reach out to someone who may be carrying a burden in silence. Your kindness could become the turning point in a story you'll never fully know. And if this story reminded you that hope can still be found even after life's hardest seasons, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to see that a single light can still guide them home. Because sometimes, the smallest act of compassion becomes the beginning of someone else's miracle.